Deadlifting 3 times a week or high frequency deadlifting in general is actually a much more interesting topic than initially meets the eye, because in powerlifting there's frequencies all over the place. Like with bench, you're usually going 2 to 6 times a week. And the thing is with frequency is that usually higher frequency does lead to better strength gains because we know that when volume is equated and split across more different days, then higher frequencies do typically lead to strength gains. But that doesn't mean you should do one set 7 times a week, because higher frequencies do definitely have their drawbacks, especially when we're talking about, tendon health and recovery and whatnot. But deadlifting 3 times a week, now that's almost taboo in powerlifting, right? You don't hear anybody doing that. Bench 2 to 6 times a week, that's normal. And I bench 4 times a week. There's no doubt to its value, I bench 4 times a week and I'm getting great strength gains, and a lot of people bench 4 times a week. I have most of my clients benching between like 3 and 4 times a week. That's normally how many times people should be benching a week for great strength gains, unless they're incredibly big humans or if they're like little tiny, like, 90-pound females who are not too strong. Maybe they should be benching 6 times a week. So there's a big variance in frequency for bench. And then for squat, it's very similar. Not to the same extent as, 2 to 6 times a week, but most people do squat between 1 and 3 times a week, and some, bring it further and squat 4 times a week. And then there's also some programs where it's like you're squatting 4, 5, 6 times a week. Now, those are not recommended, and, most smart people know not to run them. But we see them and we aren't shocked by them per se. Yet it seems to me like if we see a 3 time a week deadlift program, we're more shocked by that 3 times a week deadlift program than a 4 times a week squat program. Now, there's many reasons as to why this is, especially when we're talking about bench. Bench is a lift where we're normally not lifting 6, 7, 800 pounds, right? So we can push the frequency on that pretty high up. It's also a lift that requires a lot of practice. It's a very technical movement for a lot of people, and so practicing it more stands to reason that it would make you better at benching. And it's significantly less fatiguing than deadlift. It's not even a close comparison. And there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't deadlift 3 times a week. Obviously. And most people don't deadlift 3 times a week, and I don't right now either. I have, but right now I don't. Squatting is kind of similar because squatting is also a very technical movement. And higher frequency is better, but squatting is way more fatiguing than benching. That's why you don't really see many people squatting more than 3 times a week. And not even that many squatting 3 times a week. Most people are squatting about 2 times a week, and that's kind of like where it's at. That's optimal for most people. But what about deadlifts? Because nobody discusses high frequency deadlifts, and that doesn't inherently mean that they're bad just because nobody discusses them. They are bad for most people. They are. But they certainly do have a place for high frequency deadlifting. So, I want to put this out there. Deadlifting 3 times a week is going to be fatiguing. And most likely, if you are deadlifting 3 times a week, that means you really want to increase your deadlift. You want to specialize in it. Maybe do that for a few mesos. I don't know. But you really want to specialize in that deadlift. Now, generally speaking, it's not a good idea to specialize in deadlifting and powerlifting because the squat has a better carryover to the deadlift than the deadlift has to the squat. So if you're going to specialize in either the squat or deadlift, it makes sense that you'd specialize in the squat and not the deadlift because the carryover from squat to deadlift is better than the carryover from the deadlift to the squat. But if for whatever reason you want to increase your deadlift by a lot, like I did, mostly for ego, like I just wanted a big deadlift. It is what it is. There's like you can deadlift three times a week. That's cool. But it's interesting because how would you do that? And what would happen if you do that? Right? Because it's such a fatiguing movement, nobody says to do it. So what happens if you do it? Well, overuse injuries, crazy fatigue, and whatnot, those are all potential possibilities. But if you program it intelligently and if you do things intelligently, then that doesn't necessarily have to happen. But that being said, if you are deadlifting 3 times a week, you're probably going to have to put squat on the back burner or just don't squat at all for a period of time. Now, if you don't have a really advanced squat, then chances are your squat isn't really going to decrease much when you're doing this, or maybe it's even going to increase. Because deadlift still does have carryover to your squat, right? It's not like they're completely different things. They're still very related. And another thing that's important to note is that you can't go hard deadlifting 3 times a week. You just can't. You're gonna break down. Nobody can do that, except for maybe that tiny 100-pound person, whatever. Most people cannot deadlift hard 3 times a week. That's just not something that's gonna happen. So how do you split it up amongst like a 4 week meso, let's say? How do we split up the training from like a week to week basis, for like a block basis? Like, how are we doing this? Because you have to have some basic background programming of knowledge on this stuff. So to talk about this, there's two kinds of main adaptations in powerlifting. There's physiological and neurological. Physiological usually refers to getting big muscles, that sort of thing, and it's normally mediated through higher volumes and hypertrophy. And then there's neurological. Now the physiological pretty much raises the cap for neurological adaptations. So pretty much the more muscle mass you have, the more neurological adaptations you can make. But the neurological adaptations are really where the strength comes in. That's usually those lower rep, heavy, high intensity reps. So maybe over an 8 week period, we can focus the first meso on physiological adaptations and the second meso on more neurological adaptations. Now, in the research, we know that separating blocks like this isn't very intelligent. We know that doing specific blocks for hypertrophy and training like a bodybuilder and then doing another block and training specifically like a powerlifter, it doesn't work that well. Rather, we need to have a bit of each kind of going all the time. That's why specific hypertrophy blocks are outdated in powerlifting. We don't do them anymore. 10 years ago, everybody did them. Now we don't. And there's a reason for that. It's because separating each block into completely different things is not intelligent. That being said, our mesos can still bias certain things. And that is why in powerlifting today, still we see typically when we're further out from competition or when we're at maxing, our reps are higher, our volume is higher, we're pushing shit a little bit harder, more for those physiological adaptations. And then maybe like 12 or 8 weeks out, we're much more focusing on strength and neurological adaptations. So we can sort of apply that to how we would program an 8 week cycle. So first of all, week to week. You can't go hard 3 times a week. We already know that. So maybe the first day, day 1, the primary day, we do sort of, just like threes and fives as back downs. This is going to be the first meso. And then the second day, it's going to be a tertiary day. So this is going to be really easy. It's going to be in between the primary and the secondary day. It's going to be the easier day. And it's just going to be something like, light technique work. Maybe some pause deads. Something nice and easy. And then the third day, which is going to be the secondary day in the scenario. Day 1, day 2, day 3. But day 2 is tertiary. It's not that confusing. Day 3 is going to be maybe more higher rep deadlifts. Or maybe something else that's more physiological focus. Like RDL. That's going to really pack on that muscle. And so on that first 4 weeks, we can do like 3s and 4s on the primary day. We can do like 5s and 6s on the secondary day. And then on the tertiary day, we can literally just do like RPE 4, 5 pause deadlifts. And then the next meso, the next 4 weeks, we can do singles. Because deadlifts, we still do need some technical proficiency. And, singles, we got to be practicing singles. If we're going to do 100 max, because literally 1-to-1. That's the most specific you can get. So for the primary day, it would probably be singles. You'll start down at like RPE 5 or 6 and then wave it up until like a 9. And then the volume would probably be occasionally lowering because you're like peaking on this one. And well, with regular programming knowledge, you can deadlift 3 times a week. There's pros, there's cons, but it's doable. And it certainly will increase your deadlift indubitably.